I woke up to the sound of the birds chirping and the rustling of leaves outside. I rubbed my eyes and glanced around the cozy cabin that I had rented for a weekend getaway. It was a beautiful place, nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by trees and lush greenery. I had always loved spending time in nature, and this seemed like the perfect place to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. I had arrived the previous day and was greeted by a friendly family who owned the cabin. They had shown me around and made sure that I was comfortable before leaving. They seemed like a nice family, with 2 young children who were full of energy and always running around. But as the day progressed, I started to feel uneasy. It was like I was being watched, and every time I glanced out of the window, I felt like someone was staring back at me. The feeling grew stronger as the night fell, and I could hear strange noises coming from the woods outside. I tried to shake off the feeling and went to bed early, hoping to get a good night's sleep. But I was woken up in the middle of the night by a loud banging on the door. I sat up in bed, heart pounding in my chest, and listened as the banging continued. I got up and tiptoed to the door, peering through the peephole. There was no one there, but I could feel someone's breath on the other side. I stumbled back in terror and backed away from the door. That's when I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, coming closer and closer. I could feel my heart racing as I searched for my phone, trying to call for help. But there was no signal, and the battery was almost dead. I was trapped, alone in the cabin, with a stalker lurking outside. I heard the sound of the door creaking open, and I knew that I had to act fast. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and hid behind the door, waiting for the stalker to come in. As I saw the shadowy figure enter the room, I lunged forward, ready to defend myself. But as my knife plunged into the darkness, I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. The figure that I had attacked was not a stalker, but the friendly family who owned the cabin. They had come back to check on me, and I had mistaken them for someone else. I felt a wave of shame wash over me as I realized what I had done. The family was shocked and frightened, and I could see the fear in their eyes. I had become the very thing that I had been afraid of, a danger to those around me. From that day on, I never ventured into the woods alone again. The memory of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows. And every time I heard a rustling in the woods or felt like I was being watched, I knew that it was a warning to be careful, to never let my guard down again. After the incident, the family didn't say a word to me. They gathered their things and left the cabin without so much as a glance in my direction. I was left alone with my thoughts and the guilt of what I had done. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger, and I could sense that someone was always lurking in the woods outside. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake off the feeling. Every time I tried to leave the cabin, the sense of dread grew stronger. It was like something was trying to keep me trapped there, in the middle of the woods, with no one around to help me. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at the window. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and looked towards the window. There, in the darkness, I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. My blood ran cold, and I knew that it was the stalker who had been lurking in the woods. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead, and there was no way to contact anyone. I was alone, with no way to defend myself against the stalker, who was now trying to break into the cabin. I barricaded the door and windows, but it was no use. The stalker was determined to get in, and I could hear him pounding on the door with all his might. I could feel the wood splintering under the force of his blows. As the door gave way, I knew that it was the end. I had no weapons, no way to defend myself, and no escape. The stalker entered the room, his eyes glowing in the darkness, and I could see the madness in his eyes. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable, but nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, the stalker was gone. There was no sign of him, no trace of his presence. I was left alone in the cabin, with the memory of the stalker haunting me. I knew that I could never leave the woods, that I was trapped there forever, with no way to escape the darkness that lurked in the shadows. And every time I heard a rustling in the woods or felt like I was being watched, I knew that it was the stalker, waiting for me to let my guard down. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but I never left the cabin. I was too scared to venture into the woods again, too afraid of what might be waiting for me out there. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Every night, I could sense that something was lurking outside, waiting for me to let my guard down. I would stay awake all night, listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to make sense of the whispers and rustling that filled the air. As time passed, my mind started to unravel. I became paranoid, convinced that the stalker was always watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and stopped taking care of myself. I was consumed by fear and madness, trapped in a never-ending nightmare that I couldn't escape. One day, I woke up to find that the door of the cabin was wide open. I knew that I hadn't left it open, and the feeling of dread grew stronger. I searched the cabin, but there was no sign of the stalker. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I sat down on the bed, feeling defeated and hopeless. I knew that I could never escape the darkness that had consumed me, that I was doomed to spend the rest of my days in the cabin, with the stalker always watching me. As the night fell, I lit a candle and sat down by the window, watching the stars twinkle in the sky. And then I saw him, the stalker, standing outside, watching me with his glowing eyes. I tried to run, but it was too late. He entered the cabin, his eyes fixed on me, and I knew that it was the end. But instead of attacking me, he just stood there, watching me with a look of pity in his eyes. And then he spoke, his voice soft and gentle. "You have been trapped here for too long," he said. "It's time to let go of your fear and move on." And just like that, the stalker vanished, leaving me alone in the cabin. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I knew that it was time to face my fears and leave the cabin behind. I packed my things and left the cabin, walking towards the light that beckoned me from beyond the trees. And as I walked, I could feel the darkness lifting, replaced by a sense of hope and renewal. I had finally escaped the horror that had consumed me, and I knew that I could never go back to the cabin in the woods again. But I was alive, and that was all that mattered. As I walked further away from the cabin, the feeling of freedom and relief was overwhelming. I felt like I had been released from a prison of my own making, and I could breathe again. But as I looked back at the cabin, I could see the stalker standing in the doorway, watching me with his glowing eyes. He didn't move, just stood there, like a sentinel, watching over the cabin and the woods. I wanted to thank him, to ask him why he had spared me, and what he wanted from me, but before I could say anything, he vanished into thin air, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I walked for what felt like hours, until I finally stumbled upon a road. A car drove by, and I waved my arms, hoping that they would stop and offer me a ride. The driver was an old man, and he looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What are you doing out here, son?" he asked. I told him about the cabin in the woods, about the stalker, and how I had finally escaped. He listened patiently, nodding his head from time to time. "Sounds like you've been through quite an ordeal," he said. "Let me take you to the nearest town. You can rest and get some food and water." I thanked him, and we drove off, leaving the woods and the cabin behind. As we drove, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the stalker. Was he still watching over the cabin, waiting for someone else to enter its doors? Or had he finally found peace and moved on? The old man dropped me off at a diner in the nearest town, and I sat down, feeling grateful and relieved. I ordered some food and sat there, lost in thought. And then I saw him again, the stalker, sitting across from me, his glowing eyes fixed on mine. I wasn't afraid this time, though. I knew that he had spared me for a reason, that he had shown me a way out of the darkness. "What do you want from me?" I asked him. He didn't say anything, just sat there, watching me. And then he vanished into thin air, leaving me alone once again. I finished my meal and left the diner, feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I was free, that I had escaped the horror of the cabin in the woods. And as I walked away, I could feel the stalker's eyes on me, watching over me, like a guardian angel. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to put the memories of the cabin and the stalker behind me. But it was hard to forget the fear and the madness that had consumed me, the feeling of being watched and hunted. I moved to a new town, hoping to start fresh, to leave the past behind. I got a job at a small store, and I made some new friends. I even started to date a girl named Sarah, and for a while, life seemed normal. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Every night, I would see the stalker in my dreams, his glowing eyes fixed on me. I tried to ignore it, to push it away, but it was like a shadow that followed me wherever I went. One day, I was walking home from work when I saw him again, the stalker, standing at the end of the street, watching me with his glowing eyes. I froze, feeling like I was back in the woods, back in the cabin. But then something strange happened. The stalker turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. And then I realized that he was trying to tell me something, that he was trying to guide me. I followed him, walking through the streets, trying to keep up with his pace. He led me to an old abandoned building, a factory that had been closed down for years. I hesitated at first, but something inside me told me to keep going, to trust the stalker. I entered the building, and it was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the only light came from the moon shining through the broken windows. I walked deeper into the building, feeling like I was being led by some unseen force. And then I saw him again, the stalker, standing at the end of a long hallway. He beckoned me forward, and I followed, feeling like I was in a dream. And then I saw a door, at the end of the hallway, with a strange symbol etched into it. The stalker walked up to the door and placed his hand on it, and it opened, revealing a room filled with light and warmth. I walked in, feeling like I had entered a new world. The room was filled with people who had been through the same experiences as me, who had been stalked and haunted by the darkness. They welcomed me with open arms, and I knew that I had finally found my place in the world. The stalker watched over us, like a guardian angel, guiding us towards the light. And I knew that I could finally let go of my fear and my pain, that I could move on and start a new life. As I looked back at the door, I saw the stalker standing there, watching over us with his glowing eyes. And then he vanished, leaving me with a sense of gratitude and hope. I knew that I could never forget the horror of the cabin in the woods, but I also knew that it had led me to this moment, to this new life filled with light and love. And for that, I was grateful. But even as I embraced my new life, a nagging feeling persisted in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake off the memory of the stalker, of the fear and madness he had brought into my life. Despite the welcoming and supportive community in the abandoned factory, I couldn't forget the possibility that the stalker might return, and with him, the darkness that he represented. I started to have nightmares again, vivid and terrifying dreams of the stalker, of the cabin in the woods, and of the memories I had tried to leave behind. One day, as I was walking through the city, I saw a familiar figure in the crowd. It was the stalker, his glowing eyes fixed on me once again. I froze in terror, but this time, I didn't follow him. I turned and ran, feeling like I was back in the woods again, trying to escape the darkness. But the stalker was faster than me. He chased me through the streets, his glowing eyes lighting up the darkness around me. I stumbled and fell, feeling like I was about to be consumed by the darkness. But then, I saw something that filled me with hope, a light, a small but bright light, shining in the distance. I got up and ran towards the light, feeling like it was my only chance to escape the stalker and the darkness. As I got closer, I saw that the light was coming from a small church. I ran inside, feeling like I had found sanctuary. The church was empty, but I didn't care. I collapsed on the floor, feeling like I had escaped the darkness once again. But then I heard a voice, a soft and gentle voice that filled me with hope. "Welcome, my child. You are safe here." I looked up and saw a priest standing at the end of the aisle. He walked towards me, his kind eyes fixed on mine. "What brings you here, my child?" he asked. I told him everything about the stalker, about the cabin in the woods, and about the community in the abandoned factory. The priest listened patiently, nodding his head in understanding. "I see," he said. "You have been through a lot, my child. But know this, you are not alone. God is with you, and he will guide you towards the light." I felt a sense of peace wash over me, like a warm blanket on a cold night. The stalker might still be out there, but I knew that I had found something that was more powerful than the darkness, the light of faith and hope. As I left the church, feeling comforted and uplifted, I saw the stalker lurking in the shadows once again. I turned to run, but he was too quick for me. He grabbed me by the arm and pulled me into the darkness. I struggled and fought against him, but he was too strong. He dragged me deeper into the woods, towards the cabin where I had first encountered him. When we reached the cabin, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were dozens of other people there, all of them held captive by the stalker. They were all screaming and pleading for help, but I knew there was no escape. I was thrown into a cage with the other captives, and the stalker left us there, promising to return soon. Hours passed, and then days. We were all starving and thirsty, but there was no sign of rescue. I had lost all hope of ever escaping, and I resigned myself to a fate worse than death. But then, the first plot twist happened. One night, as I was sleeping, I heard a strange sound coming from outside. It was a soft whisper, almost like a prayer. I got up and looked through the bars of the cage, and saw a group of hooded figures approaching the cabin. They were chanting in a language I didn't understand, and carrying strange, glowing symbols. As they entered the cabin, I saw the stalker cowering in fear, as if he recognized them. They freed us from our cages and led us out of the cabin, and as we left, I saw the stalker being consumed by a strange, black mist. The hooded figures led us to safety, and we were eventually rescued by the authorities. I thought the nightmare was finally over, but I was wrong. The second plot twist happened when I found out that the hooded figures were not what they seemed. They were part of a secret cult, and they had their own plans for me and the other captives. They brought us to a remote location, deep in the mountains, where they subjected us to unspeakable rituals and experiments. They said that they were trying to summon a powerful entity, a being that would grant them eternal life and ultimate power. I was terrified and hopeless once again, but then the third plot twist happened. I discovered that I had powers of my own, powers that I had never known about before. I was able to channel energy from the universe, and I used that energy to escape from the cult and destroy their plans. But even as I left the cult behind and started a new life, I knew that the darkness was always lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume me once again. The nightmare was far from over, and I would have to be ready to face it at any moment. As I walked down the dark, deserted street, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I tried to pick up the pace, but my legs felt heavy, as if they were dragging me down. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, and my breath came out in ragged gasps. And then, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I turned around once more, and this time I saw the stalker, his eyes glinting in the darkness. I tried to run, but it was too late. He was upon me, his hands closing around my throat, choking the life out of me. As I took my last breath, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. The stalker's face transformed, his skin turning black, and his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He whispered something in a language I didn't understand, and then he vanished into thin air. I died alone, in the darkness my body never found. But even in death, I knew that the stalker was still out there, waiting for his next victim. And I knew that I would never be at peace, not as long as he continued to stalk the living.